You're watching Northern Crimes.
Oregon's stunning natural beauty, its towering mountains, dense forests, and tranquil rivers. For a lot of people, it offers the perfect escape into the wilderness. But beneath this peaceful appearance, the remote corners of Oregon's campgrounds conceal a dark history. Within these quiet, isolated spaces lie a multitude of unsolved mysteries and very violent tragedies. Today, we'll look into a series of chilling campground murders that have left communities horrified, families devastated, and law enforcement searching for answers. How could such horrific acts occur in places meant for peace and solitude? As we unravel these stories, the contrast between Oregon's natural beauty and its sometimes hidden dangers becomes disturbingly clear. This is the true story of the Oregon Campground Murders, and this is Northern Crimes. In the calm wilderness of the Siskiyou Mountains, nestled deep within Oregon's lush forests, the Cowden family embarked on what was supposed to be a peaceful Labor Day weekend in 1974. Richard Cowden, his wife Belinda, and their two young children, David and Melissa, were enjoying the tranquility of nature. But the Siskiyou Mountains would soon be shattered by a chilling and unexplained tragedy. How could an ordinary family disappear without a trace, only for their remains to be found months later in a grotesque scene that continues to baffle investigators? This is the mystery of the Cowden family murders, one of Oregon's most haunting unsolved cases. Richard Cowden was a hardworking 28-year-old logging truck driver providing for his family in White City, Oregon. His wife, 22-year-old Belinda, was a devoted mother to their two children, 5-year-old David and 5-month-old Melissa. The family had a love for the outdoors and they enjoyed spending time in nature, so their decision to camp at Carberry Creek over the holiday weekend was a natural choice. Known as a tight-knit and loving family, their disappearance would leave a haunting void in the lives of those who knew them. On September 1st, 1974, Richard and his son David made a short trip to a local store in Copper, Oregon, to buy some milk. This would be the last confirmed sighting from anyone in the Cowden family. That evening, when the family failed to arrive for dinner at Belinda's mother's house, which was located less than a mile from their campsite, concern quickly turned to panic. Belinda's mother rushed to the campground only to find an eerie scene. The family's truck parked with the keys inside, a diaper bag and purse left out, cold water in the dishpan, and half-finished milk sitting on the table. The family's pet dog, Droopy, was later found scratching at a local store's door, but there was no sign of Richard, Belinda, David, or Melissa. The disappearance of the Cowden family sparked one of the largest search efforts in Oregon's history. Law enforcement, volunteers, and even the National Guard scoured the dense wilderness surrounding the campsite. Helicopters, bloodhounds, and search parties combed through the rugged terrain, but days turned into weeks with no sign of the family. The lack of any substantial leads frustrated investigators, and the case quickly grew cold. But this was only the beginning. 7 months later, the mystery took a grim turn when two gold prospectors stumbled upon the decomposed remains of the Cowdens 7 miles from their campsite. Richard was found tied to a tree, while Belinda, David, and Melissa were discovered in a shallow cave nearby. Belinda and David had been shot with a .22 caliber weapon, and baby Melissa's skull had been crushed. Despite exhaustive efforts, the investigation was marred by a lack of physical evidence, and no murder weapon was ever recovered. To this day, the Cowden family murders remain unsolved. While suspicion fell on a local man, Dwayne Lee Little, a convicted murderer who was in the area at the time, no concrete evidence has ever linked him to the Cowden family's deaths. Little was later convicted of another violent crime, but the murders of the Cowden family continue to elude justice. The case stands as one of Oregon's most perplexing mysteries, and the remote Siskiyou Mountains still harbor secrets that may never come to light. The memory of the Cowden family lingers, a tragic reminder of the dark unknown that can exist even in the most peaceful of places. In the quiet, mist-shrouded woods of the Oregon coast, a chilling mystery unfolded over Thanksgiving weekend in 1987. Alain Malessard, a 27-year-old French adventurer cycling across North America, was found brutally murdered at a closed campground near Nescowan Creek. His dream of exploring North America's vast landscapes was abruptly cut short in a crime that remains unsolved to this day. Who would want to kill this joyful traveler, and why? The answers have eluded investigators for decades, leaving behind only haunting questions and a cold case shrouded in mystery. Alain Malessard was a young man filled with an adventurous spirit. Born and raised in France, he had a passion for cycling from an early age. After saving his money for years, Alain embarked on the trip of a lifetime, planning to bike across Canada and the United States. By the time he reached the U.S. in late 1987, he'd already covered thousands of miles. Described by friends and family as cheerful, full of life, and kind-hearted, Alain was living his dreams until he met a tragic and untimely end in the peaceful Oregon wilderness. On Thanksgiving Day, 1987, Alain's lifeless body was discovered at Nescowan Creek Campground, a primitive Forest Service campsite closed for the season. His journey had taken him to the Oregon coast, where he stopped to camp for the night, but something went horribly wrong. Alain was struck on the back of the head by an unknown object, likely taken by surprise as he settled in for the evening. There were no obvious signs of a robbery or motive, but his bicycle and personal belongings were left untouched. Despite his quiet solo travels, Alain's brutal death was anything but peaceful. The initial investigation into Alain's murder was fraught with challenges. Law enforcement agencies struggled to gather sufficient evidence, and the crime scene itself was compromised. Whether by the perpetrator or law enforcement themselves remains unclear. Oregon State Police investigators expressed frustration over the lack of forensic evidence, later admitting that modern investigative tools might have made a difference. As the investigation proceeded, suspicion briefly turned toward fern harvesters in the area, but this lead went nowhere. A deeper exploration of possible suspects, including a local activist named Darrell Dino Butler, also came up empty. Decades later, filmmaker Tom Olson Jr. would attempt to piece together the fragments of this case for his documentary, Old Growth Murder. But even after 10 years of research, no new answers were found. Today, the murder of Alain Malessard remains unsolved, leaving behind a trail of grief for his family and an unresolved case for investigators. Alain's parents visited the Oregon coast years after their son's death, seeking closure at the site where his life was taken. The documentary, Old Growth Murder, continues to shine a light on the case, raising questions about investigative failures and the potential impact of modern forensic techniques. But despite this renewed interest, Alain's killer has never been found. His dream of adventure ended in tragedy, leaving a haunting mystery on the Oregon coast that still hovers over the Nescoin Creek campground. In the serene woods near the California-Oregon border, a peaceful camping trip in 2012 turned into a nightmare. Chris MacCallum, a devoted father of two, was out for what seemed like a quiet weekend with his wife, Patricia. But beneath the surface, a dark plan was unfolding, one that would end in devastating tragedy. How did a family outing result in Chris's untimely death? This is the chilling story of betrayal and loss that shocked everyone who knew him. Chris MacCallum was a 34-year-old husband and father from Medford, Oregon. Described by friends and family as kind and caring, Chris always put his children first. Despite the struggles in his marriage, Chris was determined to make things work for the sake of his family. A hardworking man, he dreamed of providing a stable life for his loved ones. Tragically, this loving father's life was cut short in a way that no one could have predicted. On November 20th, 2012, Chris MacCallum's body was found at the base of a steep cliff in the rural Applegate Creek area. He'd been reported missing after not returning from a camping trip with his wife, Patricia. But what initially appeared to be an unfortunate accident quickly turned suspicious. As investigators pieced together the events, it became clear that Chris had not fallen by accident. He'd been the victim of a calculated plan involving his wife, Patricia MacCallum, and her former stepsister, Amber. This once serene campsite had turned into the setting of a deeply troubling crime. The investigation into Chris's death uncovered a shocking conspiracy. Patricia and Amber had plotted to harm Chris during their camping trip. Amber later testified that they'd set the plan in motion, serving Chris drinks while secretly staying sober themselves. As Chris slept, Patricia shot him multiple times before rolling him over the embankment. With Amber's cooperation, the authorities gathered enough evidence to arrest Patricia, who was charged with her husband's death. The case revealed a web of deception and betrayal, leaving investigators and the local community shaken. In 2016, Patricia MacCallum was found guilty and sentenced to 50 years to life in prison for her role in Chris's death. During the trial, Chris's family shared their pain, expressing their deep loss and devastation. Despite Patricia's claims of innocence, the evidence presented in court pointed to her involvement beyond a reasonable doubt. Today, Chris's family continues to mourn the loss of a beloved father, son, and friend. While justice has been served, the memory of this tragedy hangs in the air, reminding us of the fragility of life and the importance of unwavering trust in those we hold close. In the summer of 2005, two beloved educators, Stevan Haugen and Jeanette Bauman, ventured into the woods of Willamette National Forest. But what should have been a quiet retreat turned into a chilling nightmare. Their bodies were later discovered at a remote campsite, and it sparked one of Oregon's most unsettling murder investigations. Who could have brutally ended the lives of two people who dedicated their days to teaching and caring for kids? Stevan Haugen, 54, was a middle school counselor and track coach at Westridge Middle School in Oakridge, Oregon. Known as Mr. H, or Coach, he was beloved by his students and colleagues alike for his kindness and dedication to education. Jeanette Bauman, 56, had recently moved to Oakridge to teach after years of inspiring students in Montana and Washington. Both were passionate about the outdoors and often spent their free time camping and enjoying nature. Their friends and family described them as generous, caring, and full of life, two people who had no enemies. On July 1st, 2005, campers in the Staley Creek area south of Oakridge made a grim discovery: the lifeless bodies of Stevan, Jeanette, and their dog Caesar. The couple had been shot multiple times at their remote campsite. Investigators found evidence that suggested they'd been shot from a distance before being shot again at close range. Their car, a 1994 GMC Jimmy, was missing its license plates, and several personal items, including a revolver and custom fishing rods, were gone. But was this a robbery gone wrong, or was there something more disturbing at play? The Lane Sheriff County's office quickly launched an investigation, but the case grew cold almost as soon as it began. Despite interviewing campers in the area and spending 10 days searching the woods, no one reported hearing any gunshots. Investigators would later find shell casings from both a high and low-powered weapon, adding to the mystery. Some authorities, including the FBI, theorized that this could have been the work of a so-called, quote, super hunter, a person who becomes territorial over certain areas of public land and eliminates intruders. There was even some theories that Alaskan serial killer Israel Keyes might be involved, but these leads went nowhere. Despite following up on other leads and testing items found at the scene for DNA, the case remains unsolved. Nearly 2 decades later, the murders of Stevan Haugen and Jeanette Bauman are still a mystery. Family members, including Stevan's daughter Kelly and Jeanette's son Dan, continue to search for closure. They regularly visit the crime scene, and they've built a memorial in honor of their loved ones. Though the investigation is stalled, new advances in DNA testing and forensic science give the families hope that the case might still be solved. With a $10,000 reward for information and several persons of interest still on the investigators' radar, the search for answers continue. But the question remains, will justice ever be served? Oregon's wilderness holds a dark secret. Beneath its serene exterior, remote campgrounds have become scenes of brutal crimes, and these unsolved cases haunt both families and investigators. Years have passed, yet the perpetrators remain at large. The wilderness guards its secrets while those left behind continue their search for answers. As time marches on, a pressing question looms. Will justice ever be served, or will the truth remain hidden in Oregon's vast expanse? These Oregon Campground Murders serve as a chilling reminder that even the most tranquil places can conceal unspeakable horrors.